The purpose of Vantage Point is to offer a platform for thought leaders to discuss topics which impact and improve business and organizational performance. In 2023, we're dedicating a full year to the topic of sustainability. Today's event continues the conversation with an exploration of sustainable practices in aviation and aerospace. To shed light on this very exciting topic, I am delighted and excited to introduce our Vantage Point speakers, Mr. Christopher Geiger and Mr. Ronnie Plott. Christopher currently serves as Vice President of Internal Audit and Enterprise Risk at Lockheed Martin, a Fortune 100 aerospace and defense company with a presence in over 50 countries. He has been with Lockheed Martin for 20 years and was most recently the Director of Enterprise Risk and Sustainability, where he led related program strategy, implementation, and stakeholder engagement. He frequently publishes and speaks on topics at intersection of risk, sustainability, and resilience. Ronnie joins us, Ronnie Plott, that is, from the great country of Israel. He is the CEO and co-founder of AIR, A-I-R, and eVTOL startup, designing personal aerial vehicles. Ronnie, I'm looking forward to getting my own from you. An angel tech investor, Ronnie is keenly interested in technology-based disruptions and innovation. Driven by this passion, as well as his background in mathematics, physics, and experience in automotive and aerospace technologies, Ronnie has found success in multiple business ventures. Prior to AIR, he was CEO and co-founder of Pulsar Limited, and subsequently co-founded and led BMAX and iPulse subsidiary. Ronnie and Christopher are joined in today's events by our Worldwide College of Business, Department of Management and Technology Chair, Dr. Aaron Glassman, who himself from an aviation background will engage in conversation with the panel and address live questions from the audience. And on that note, I'd like to invite our viewers to ask any questions they have through the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Without further delay, therefore, it is my pleasure once again to invite our panelists, Christopher and Ronnie. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, wow, what fun this will be. Thank you, Dean Sharma, for the amazing introductions. One of the things I wanted to just talk about in the very beginning is that sustainability has become an interesting term. I don't want to call it a buzzword because that makes it sound naughty or disparaging, and that's not the intent, certainly, of this conversation. But it's used really often, and it's a very common word that we hear in almost kind of every turn. So I want to kind of launch with the idea that we need to define it first. So I would love to hear each of your interpretations in a general sense. We'll get to aviation more specifically in a moment. But how do you define sustainability, and kind of what does it mean to you? And Christopher, if you want to go first, great. Or Ronnie,
sure. I'll jump in there. So it's a great kind of overview question, and I know we use green in the title of the webinar here, so I think I do prefer sustainability. That's a good use of I think a word that's going to last a long time. I'm hoping that it's around a while. So at Lockheed Martin, we're a 100-year-old company. We've been around for that long, and as I do risk management and sustainability, I look out at the next 100 years. And so I kind of frame sustainability in that very long-term thinking and say, we've had aviation, right, for only a certain amount of time. Think about what we're going to need for that very long term, and how to avoid the tragedy of the commons, right? And anything humans, engage in all the way back for hundreds of years, we tend to mess it up if given the chance to overuse things. And sustainability is to say, no, we want to live on this planet more than another 100 years, but thousands of years. How do we put in systems thinking so that our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren are able to live the kind of lives we would like them to?
It's interesting that it's such a future-focused definition. That's really interesting. Ronnie, what's your take on that?
Well, the word that comes to my mind is responsibility rather than sustainability, because and as Christopher said, we tend to mess things up and to misuse things. And one of the things that we tend to do is to put our hands in the sand. And maybe batteries is a very good example. Okay, there is a problem there, and some of us are intelligent, I think, and there is no point in waiting for the disaster to happen when you know it's going to happen. So when I say responsibility, and I concur to what Christopher said, it's about thinking very long term and putting our smartness, our minds, our brains into action, and thinking about the scenarios that will happen. I mean, if you're going to produce 1 billion cars that are powered on batteries that are made of lithium, something will happen, and it involves 1 billion batteries, okay? And you have to do something with it. And we tend to come to the crisis, and it's by the way, this is very natural, okay? In nature, generally speaking, as organisms go, most organisms act only on stress or distress, okay? We are the only species that can think about the future. And we are not doing it in a responsible way. So I would say that what we have to do is to put our minds truly not into net zero CO2 emissions within the action that we're doing now, but think about the whole value chain and supply chain. And we can truly imagine, I don't know if it's 35% of 80 or 85% or 70%, but we can imagine much more than we're doing currently. And what we're doing currently is not responsible enough. So we have to increase that couple of notches up.
It's fascinating because I just heard both a practical argument and almost a moral and ethical argument for sustainability. The practical applications of this, plus it's just the right thing to do for the sake of doing the right thing. So it's interesting to see that. So I'm going to shift gears for a moment and probably zoom in just a little bit. So let's shift to aviation. So how do you see maybe a greener or more innovative aviation space in the coming years? I know we talked about 100 years and even more than that. You can pick your own time horizon when you want to, however you want to answer the question. But just trying to think out into the future, what does a more innovative and greener aviation landscape look like?
Well, first of all, coming back to what I said before, I'll start with what not to do. I've heard about greener jet fuel, which is considered greener because it's produced not from fossil fuel, but from biomass or something, and then the net zero is calculated differently because we're if it's 65 million years ago, then we can erase the input and take only the output into account. And if we generate the fuel now, then maybe we can subtract the inwards and outwards. It doesn't work. Okay, the question is, how much do you generate? Okay, so I wouldn't try to go around the problem. This is as a first. Generally speaking, I think that we are generally a very innovative people. There are many. I mean, Lockheed Martin is a very good example for that. And efficiency is something that can. You can improve dramatically efficiency always. The weight, I think, is something. The suspects are very simple. Okay, you cannot reduce weight by much, probably. Maybe 20% more, but not much more. You can increase efficiency of aviation tremendously, for sure. And the promise of electricity, and this is something I keep saying, people say electric, and actually electric is divided to the power system or the storage system and the propulsion system. The propulsion system has an enormous impact because when you have distributed power or propulsion, you can play more. Okay, you can create efficiency on the wing, not only in propulsion of the aircraft, by the way, flow control on wings and so and surfaces, aerodynamic surfaces, and so forth, so forth. So I think this is a new realm that should be and starts to be explored. And I think that that's the next step. I mean, going electric, working on storage, and looking down the barrel of the efficiency question.
It's interesting that I think I heard both a technology and a mindset. So there's some tangible technologies there, but there's also the mindset that drives them. Christopher, kind of, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I'll talk about some other aspects of it, because to that point, you can look at the propulsion and the fuel use. You think at Lockheed Martin, we make a lot of aircraft. We actually don't build engines, right? we buy those like most other people. And what we focus on are the things that are in our control generally. And one of those is the use of intelligence and AI and data. And so you can actually be much more sustainable by being smarter about how you use resources. An example would be while I was leading sustainability and we're doing analysis for climate impacts out many decades in the future. We looked at wildfire risk, for instance, as climates change, wildfires change. And Lockheed Martin actually has a lot to bring to the table with firefighting, or could. So we have firefighting helicopters and aircraft like C-130s. We have satellite surveillance. We have AI we use in tactical situations similar to a fire, but we've never looked at it that way. And so we actually came up with firefighting as a service and firefighting intelligence as a service, as a sustainable way to of course, it's a business opportunity. So that's one thing, is sustainability isn't always risk. Sustainability is sometimes opportunity, but also to say, how are we going to benefit not just ourselves, because yes, we have wildfire risk at our facilities in the American West, but how are we going to be able to benefit a wider group? So you're looking at how to use intelligence wisely, how do you mitigate sustainability risks, and aviation can actually play a role with that. Another example would be in the operations. So there's a tremendous amount of operations on flight lines and production on the CapEx of the whole aviation industry. And so you can't just look, I don't think, at the product. There's a whole lot that goes into that supply chain. For instance, in Lockheed Martin's case, we have tens of thousands of suppliers. And so we actually, make sure that we do capital expense, a huge amount, billions every year, that we're doing that in a sustainable fashion. So that could be the buildings you're building that you're going to literally have for the next 40, 50, 60 years. Your production lines, where do you put them? How do you do that in a more efficient and green way? So there's a lot around the business. And that's part of what I did for a few years, of how do you get this embedded in what every employee does, and not just necessarily a sticker you can put on your product.
So I'm listening intently to this and actually taking a few notes, because this is really fascinating to me. The idea that we can use some of these concepts elsewhere, and we're still in this learning mode, is fascinating. When you look at firefighting and firefighting as a service, I'm always also fascinated by the as a service kind of concept. So as a university focused on aerospace, I would be remiss not to use the word space in a sentence. So Christopher, if you may, we can springboard. Tell me about your thoughts on space sustainability. We'll come back to kind of the technologies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I just want to take that kind of to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. I was seeing if you were willing to go that high up. So we actually do a good bit in space sustainability. And there's two aspects when you say that. Part of it is actually the sustainability of low Earth orbit primarily. And to most people on Earth, that maybe seems silly. It's a pretty big place, right? They don't think it can be that crowded. But honestly, there are constellations going up with tens of thousands of satellites apiece. And LEO is getting a little busy. Between that and other debris. And so there are now companies whose whole mission it is to do cleanup. of LEO. And so we're actually part of a group doing space sustainability ratings for anything you launch up, a satellite or anything else, and saying we should be responsible with what you put in space. It should deorbit if it possibly can. You should plan into your mission to deorbit. You should plan, that at the end of your satellite's use, it doesn't, explode or do something like that. So there are some things you can do responsibly, and we're actually leading the way. Because this is a place where actually, launch can be impacted. It's one of the reasons why launch windows are so much smaller now than if you were around in the 1980s. There used to be huge launch windows, and now there are often very small launch windows, and that's because there's a lot of junk up there. But another aspect of space sustainability is using that data and using the ability to look at Earth for remote sensing, and using that actually for Earth sustainability and for the benefit to Earth. I've talked to many countries that you might not think would even have a space program, developing countries that are using space data. They may be using other people's data, or they may have their own, maybe nanosats or others, to look at their own forest, look at their own carbon footprint. Lockheed Martin actually has a geocarb instrument that can look at carbon use throughout the atmosphere, or depth all the way down to forests, and see how things are moving throughout the atmosphere. So I think you have to look at sustainability from wherever you're situated and say, how does this affect me? Not, well, it's over there, it's oil companies, or it's cement companies. Or you have to look at, how does this really affect us beyond climate change? But beyond that, to how do we live in balance with wherever we are? And we're on our way to the moon, right? We're talking about a cislunar economy. Lockheed Martin is very involved, as are others, with what humans are going to do on the moon, not just to visit and come back, but to live there. And it's probably not just going to be Americans, it'll be other nations as well. And I mentioned the tragedy of the commons. Like, let's for once go somewhere, and from the very, very beginning, do so in a sustainable fashion.
Interesting. I'm fascinated by your use of kind of a sustainable architecture. How do we build it from the beginning properly? Identifying what properly means and looks like.
Right.
So I'm curious about that piece as well. Ronnie, do you want to kind of springboard off of that from either a space point of view or an innovation point of view, either or?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert on space, but first of all, I concur the mission and the approach, because the simple statement, there's a lot of junk up there, is very strong. I mean, and it's not an unlimited amount of volume there, and the chain reaction can be horrendous. I mean, and we're coming close to a very dangerous proximity between objects there,
Yes.
Which can spiral out of control in the blink of an eye. And this is on one hand. On the other hand, we are starting to be dependent on data that is collected, communication for sure. So it's not only the fact that we are polluting the whole volume, we are also developing a dependency that is very fragile. So again, I don't have anything to contribute there. The only thing that I can relate to in terms of our business is, in fact, the data collection. Okay, and what we see, generally speaking, is that, or our concept in air, generally speaking, is that there is a lot of more volume than space on the face of the Earth that is unused. And it's not that I think that we are going to, take 30% of cars off the roads and put them in the air, but we are trying to contribute our small portion. And we think, I think we've all seen it in COVID. Okay, when you reduce congestion by 7% sometimes, or 8%, everything is declogged. Okay. And a big part of that is the capex that is being introduced into the general population, such as our solution. But a lot of it is data that is getting collected by approaches like Christopher's. So I think that there is a lot in the intelligence of the use of the collection and use of data. both in terms of getting out of trouble, such as forest fighting for fires, but also in terms of the management of how we move on the planet. Things like air traffic, or where do you go, or how do you go, supported by data that you are collecting, I think is a major force in the future of aviation.
So I had the pleasure of watching, Ronnie, one of your YouTube videos the other day, and it was just fascinating to kind of listen to you speak about your passions and your innovations. So if you wouldn't mind, tell me a bit about the intersection of innovation and sustainability, because it's crystal clear that you're an innovator, and there's also this sustainability piece. But how does innovation and sustainability coexist and combine? Because some would say innovation isn't always sustainable, and we talked about architecting from the ground up in a sustainable way. But how do those two things coexist?
Well, first of all, I must say that I'm a bit of a contrarian in that area, and I'm a 56-year-old entrepreneur with many failures and a few successes. So at least my wife thinks I should know something by now. And the love-hate relationship comes to the fact that innovation generally is bad, okay, especially for an entrepreneur. Okay, if you look at our aircraft, we didn't invent things that are flying in the air, right? What we're doing is a new approach in terms of the user-device relationship, I would say, and this is innovation enough. Okay, now if we're in Israel, we really love innovation. We have new motors, new batteries, new cables, new software. The more innovation you pour into your product, the higher the risk. Okay, so if you have two new things, and each one of them has a 20% chance or risk, let's say, that's you multiply the probability for a failure, and when you multiply probabilities, it goes only one way, and it's going down. Okay, you never reduce risk by multiplying more risk into the equation. So I think that again, the thing that resonates in my mind currently is the word responsibility. Okay, it's not about the innovation. It's about the product. Okay, it's about the success of your idea. And if our idea is to introduce more general aviation into the general population, and maybe reduce the amount of shine you have from the word pilot. Okay, the same way that a driver, when you're driving your car, you're not a driver. You're just a dude with a car, right? A driver is a truck driver or a bus driver, a professional driver. You don't have an unprofessional pilot. Okay, and if you look at the number of cars on the road and the number of aircraft in the air, so this is the paradigm we're trying to change. And introducing more innovation too early is damaging the whole idea. Okay, so we are not talking, for example, about fuel cells or hydrogen, because these are not mature enough. Okay, we're taking fully mature technologies as much as possible and introducing them into a product which by itself as a concept is new. And I think that the place where innovation and responsibility or sustainability meets is exactly the right amount of innovation, which is considerably lower than what people think. That's my take.
No, that's really interesting. I love the dude with a car part. That's my favorite line so far. Christopher, are you in the same kind of contrarian space as Ronnie, or do you view it differently?
Well, it's a good point. I think there's a difference in the entrepreneurial side, and sometimes, I have maybe a customer who's had the same aircraft for decades, and I'll use an example of, and maybe it's along the same lines, but the U-2 aircraft, right, which we designed and built in the 1950s, very high altitude aircraft. We're still flying them, we're still maintaining them. Lockheed Martin is, and it's slated to fly for decades in the future, so it'll probably be 100 years old. the airframe itself, and still be flying. But that was actually the first aircraft in the world to, with AI on board, self-change its own flight operational programs with no human intervention in flight. So if you think about it, it's one of the oldest aircrafts that are still flying, and literally it has on board now, with a human on board, we're letting it change its own flight software. So sometimes you can use tried and true things, and this maybe is aligned with what Ronnie was saying. And basically, I think that's sustainable in a way, as you don't throw out the aircraft, right? And you don't just go buy a new one. You don't just upgrade to upgrade like you do with your phone. And the military, who's our primary customer, is actually pretty good at this, where we often maintain aviation, but also other platforms for a very long time. And so it wasn't called sustainability when we started doing it a long time ago, right? It was just made sense, and it was very high capital dollar items, and you needed to refresh them. But when I design something, and I'm an engineer by training, even if it's going to be out in the field for 30, 40, 50 years, our customers in the Department of Defense, they say, what's the decommissioning plan? Like, they're already planning for, what do you do with this thing when it's done? Because they've had to deal with that with other things, right? They've learned their lessons from other things in World War II, for instance, that were kind of messy to fix in the end. And companies have as well. So I think innovation from that perspective, and it's not so new to incorporate sustainability into things, but sometimes you can find it in old places you didn't expect.
So I'm intrigued by this only because there's a lot of conversation about kind of the marriage of innovation and sustainability, but we actually just made a pretty powerful case against innovation and sustainability as a common marriage. Not in every circumstance. Obviously, it's circumstantial. I'm trying not to write big, broad kind of rules. A question from the audience, and more questions are good. Please type them out. I will certainly get to them as best and as fast as I can. This one, I think, is back to you, Ronnie, which is, as it relates to autonomous air vehicles, do you see any kind of issues? And what are the promises going forward from a sustainability point of view and in general?
Well, again, this is not the regular opinion of an entrepreneur in eVTOLs. I don't believe in autonomy at all. There is, the biggest factor in human-machine interface is the human, not the machine. Okay, and when you sit on an elephant, you tend to let it go wherever it wants. When you sit on a horse, you want to have the reins and control it. Okay. In the same way, when you sit in a train or an Airbus 380, sorry, Christopher, you don't care. Frankly, you know it's okay. The FAA said it's okay, and you don't care if there is someone in the cockpit, or more, just if someone told you that it's automated, you would say, okay. When things tend to be your size or closer to your size, the human nature, perception, psychology, and so forth is about control. You want to control it. And autonomous vehicles on the road showed it. Okay, it's very hard for us as a species to let go of the reins. And it doesn't matter why, okay? It's a fact. And it will probably take decades for that to go away. And furthermore, there is a chain of command. So the regulator needs to say that it's okay, and then the people should say that they are okay with what the regulator is saying. So there is a resonance between those two that will not go away, I think, for 2 or 3 decades. So I don't believe so much in autonomy in the air. I think that people are there to stay for the next few decades. And I think that we first have to introduce this new kind of aviation, such as what I'm doing in eVTOL. And then when this is accepted, maybe we can move to a more automated realm.
It's interesting, the argument for and against autonomous anything. I'm reminded of an interesting letter that's many, many years old, decades and decades, from the Elevator Operators Union. that
Yeah.
said nobody would operate an elevator as well as a human. And of course, I
Yeah.
can't recall in my lifetime having seen an elevator operator. But it was fascinating, the sentiment at the time. And as somebody who's studied human factors, I found autonomous, I'll confess, I test drove a vehicle that could drive itself. I was really bored. There was an interesting component of boredom at play.
Yeah,
So,
someone told me just recently in Oshkosh, who wants to sit in a transparent egg and being transported somewhere? That's not fun. I'm sorry. And being in the air is about fun. I mean, Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, Mary Poppins, you want to fly, right? And what's fun about sitting and being transported somewhere? It's the fun factor is nothing to, I think, to neglect.
selfishly, I agree. I agree completely. So, Christopher, do you have a take on that or a spin on that?
Well, we're not. What we are working on, I would say, are CCAs, right? Collaborative combat aircraft. But those are, and what I can share, those are not things that we send out far off away and they're completely autonomous, like a cruise missile, for instance. Instead, there's something that is a loyal wingman, is the concept in the U.S. and other countries, and so there's still a manned aircraft. But maybe there are other aircraft around that can do things that are a little riskier or further out or have different missions. And they can maybe be unmanned, but they're basically being quarterbacked. As the idea from the manned platform. So I could see, currently the U.S. doesn't have unmanned, fighter jets, but in the future there could be something like a manned unmanned teaming, is what we call it, and that gets to that augmented part. Where the person probably isn't flying, isn't having to, move the control surfaces all the time on their own jet even, but they are still very much involved in the mission of what that group of aircraft is doing. So I think over time, we're going to see that increase.
Yeah, and with that, I completely agree, by the way. So in our aircraft, for example, we have very smart envelope protection. So the aircraft can loop, can roll, can do everything power-wise, aerodynamically. But for example, you cannot bank over 45 degrees because we don't want him to. Okay, so
Yep.
you feel like you're in control, but when you get to the edges of where we think it's safe for you and other people, we'll just not cut you off, but advise you not to go there and even prevent you from going there. Same goes for crashing into things and so forth.
Really fascinating. So we're at about the halfway point. So I would love to see questions and things from those who have tuned in, and thank you for those who have tuned in. I'm just super, super curious kind of where the minds are of those who are listening to this. So there is a question, and so I apologize for looking over here. Speaking to the operations and maintenance of aviation, where do you see the most opportunity for sustainability and or innovation, et cetera, in maintenance practices, training with AR and VR, manufacturing, et cetera? So where would you focus?
So that's a great point. We're kind of focusing in all those areas. I'll tell you, and in my past, I was the chief engineer of our sustainment, our aircraft sustainment group. And yes, you're exactly right. And I mentioned that for the first question, I think, is that's hidden. People don't think about it, right? They think about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and other things. But really, there's so much infrastructure that goes into the maintenance, the logistics of aviation. And so, remote SME for aviation. So you're repairing a helicopter on the flight line somewhere in the world. You put on your goggles, and I've seen this where you can dial in to an expert, and they can draw a permanent. Say it's this bolt you want to unscrew right here, and here's the tension you want. And as you move you around, you still see it there. Those are things that are going to incredibly help. How we cost effectively and just with low resources, sustain things. The other part of sustainability, though, we've been talking a lot about the environmental, is the social side. And so the people aspect, like at Lockheed Martin, is also quite important. If you think about like the acronym ESG, environment, social, and governance, the social aspect, we put a number of goals around that as well. And so how do you want to make sure things are, being affected to all people in the right way? So, not only are Lockheed Martin sustainability goals, around environment, I'll share, we also do specific goals that are tracked and that are actually important to our executives, like for instance with digital responsibility. If you think about how we properly use data, and that could be in AI or that could be in other information systems, how do we use it so that it's being done in a responsible and ethical fashion? And that goes for maintenance and training and the training data you keep on people. How are you using it? So a lot of these things we have committees internally that decide that think about these things, and everything we do, how is it affected by our sustainability goals, and what would we maybe want to change? It often gets to that very mechanical part, right? It's not necessarily the vision. You nail that down, and then you say every aspect of your company or every aspect of your flight line, how should this have safeguards or be more responsible to make it more sustainable?
Yeah.
Please, Ronnie, go ahead.
Well, in our case, first of all, we are in contact. We are a very young company. Okay, so we are. I mean, the company exists since 2018. We raised money only in 2020, so we started hiring engineers in January 21. We started designing the aircraft in March 21, and we flew it on June 22. So that's a 1.1 ton aircraft. So that's a very nice pace, but we are still under 30 people. So we don't have the capacity to do it, but we have a lot of thinking, doing some thinking with some partners, such as your institute, and we are talking about. Of course, there is a lot of AR, VR discussions about that, and into that mix, I should add the fact that when you have a distributed power, completely electrical, computerized system with almost no mechanical parts, you have a lot of preventive maintenance and general maintenance data. And actually, we are living through this era in automotive. And when my father had a flat tire, it was, oh my God, we're gonna die. We're on a highway doing 65. We have a flat tire. It's very dangerous. Now you have, something is blinking. You're missing a little bit of air, or you have a flat tire. You can go up to 40 miles an hour, and please take care of it as soon as possible. Okay, so the trend is moving the responsibility from the user and operator to the machine and the technology. And I think that generally the electrification part makes the technology cover a lot more of the aircraft. So this means you will not get even when you have a Cessna, you need to check it visually, the mechanical parts, the freedom between the bearings and everything needs to be checked. When you have an electrical computerized system, the system can tell you way before you know anything that you're on the way to something, and you have to take care of it. Okay, this means maintenance is reduced or even done early, way before failure. It means the lifetime of the parts is longer because you're not servicing them on time, you're servicing them on performance. So generally speaking, I think that the electrification contributes tremendously to this trend, side by side to sustainability, but also safety, of course, and operational easiness, I would say.
That's really, really interesting the way you kind of positioned that, as far as the technology doing some of that work that the human used to do, as well as its self-checking and even self-corrective behaviors. Another question, and I'm going to use that naughty word sometimes, profitability, in a sentence. How can leaders in the aviation industry balance the demands for growth and profitability with the imperative of sustainable practices for the environment? How do you do that?
Yeah, it needs to not be in conflict. And I already mentioned sometimes these risks lead to opportunities, but they don't always. There are definitely sometimes costs. But I mentioned how we put things in, we call it mainstreaming it. So it isn't just let's add a committee and let's talk about sustainability, let's do something and have a goal. You have to say, how does it really impact every function? We're a very large organization with functions and matrices and profit and loss areas. And the only way to get it for the long term is to make sure it's embedded. And it's just part of any trade. Like, we're a bunch of engineers, you know how to do trade studies, and you know what's important to things. And customers do care about this. So it isn't just a cost, right? A throwaway like cost. It's something that can be a differentiator. It can bring value. And in many cases, and consumer brands are talking about this, right? It can drive why people purchase things, to at least to some part, a portion of it. And so I can tell you that even for defense platforms that Lockheed Martin makes, some of our customers, many of our customers, want to know data on them around environment and other things. And so that can actually be part of the value proposition. It's not just how fast it goes or how far it can go. So, as leaders understand that and understand that this is a priority, then it becomes a much easier conversation. The other thing is there's more stakeholders to most organizations than or maybe the average employee or the average customer thinks, right? There's also your investors, there's regulators, there's the kind of the social license, there's the kind of general populace and their opinion of you. And so understanding where you want to be with all of those stakeholders can also drive value. It isn't just around when someone buys your product or not. But if you want to, and this is a reason to come talk to Embry-Riddle, right? If you want to recruit the best people to your organization, you want to be a sustainable organization. You want people to want to work there. Like I've worked at Lockheed Martin for over 20 years. You want them to come, you train them, you treat them well, and they do wonderful work and they want to stay and then, lead. And that if you want that, you also want to be able to attract these people. And that's a way to do that. It's not just about, what the customer is going to think.
Ronnie, what's your take? I'm curious from an entrepreneurial point of view.
Yeah, well, in my case, it's harder, I think, because when you sell to organizations and corporations, especially large ones, be it an army, a government, or an airliner, the checks and balances, it's harder. It's a committee that takes the decision. And there are some checks and balances in place to make sure that ESG, for example, is taken care of. When you sell to the customer, which is Joe from Montana, okay, there is a trap there, okay, because I can sell whatever. The responsibility is on me, okay. It's not on him. If I sell something which is grants the customer a huge amount of fun, but is very dangerous on the sustainable front, somebody will buy it, okay. And profitability in our case is not a problem because normally, they sell, I think in the States, they sell 20 or 25 million cars a year. Light sport aircraft, I think new aircraft are at under 2,000, I think, a year. Okay. So if I sell, and we intend to sell, we currently have about 800 customers on the list, okay, which makes us the largest aircraft manufacturer on the planet if we get to succeed to deliver them. So we have the opportunity, I think, to sell thousands, potentially speaking, and at least hundreds. And if I do it unresponsibly, I will probably sell them. That's not a problem, and I will probably make a profit. So that's a trap that I think that some of the people in my industry are not taking seriously enough. and it's a shame because people will buy them even if they are bad in terms of sustainability. So so it's on us, and we are very, very opinionated in doing that in a very sustainable way. Which means, by the way, we have to make some more stressors on the company, such as profitability under sustainability. Okay, but it's on us, and it's a problem again because there is an opportunity to make money out of bad things, and somebody is going. Normally, when you have that, somebody is doing that. So there is a problem there that is, I think, cannot be addressed without simply being responsible again.
So it begs the question, just to kind of springboard off of that, do you believe that organizations hold the bulk of the burden to be responsible? Because you took it off of Bob in Montana, or the dude with the car, or whomever, and you placed it solely on the shoulders of the organization. Is that a shared responsibility, or are organizations in the lead, or how do you view that?
Well, it's not the organization; it's the manager of the organization. Okay, and I think I mean, there are numerous examples of how a single leader, it doesn't matter if it's a 10,000 people company or 100,000 people company or 600,000 people company, if the leader, a single person, is not responsible enough or clean enough in his, for the lack of the better word, his soul is not clean enough. Sorry for being spiritual for a second. Then it will go bad. Okay, sometimes it takes 2 decades, sometimes it takes 2 years, but it goes bad, and vice versa. If the leader is good, it will go to good places. So it's not the organization as an organism; it's the brains of the organization, meaning the leader and the leadership.
Yeah, let me jump in there for a second and also say, governments have largely not filled this role as well. So, there's been some regulation, there's disclosures. It's funny, a lot of the disclosures are really just for public companies. So very large, stock traded, listed companies sometimes have disclosures primarily in the EU, but other places as well. But it's largely not, there's not a carbon tax, for instance, right, in most jurisdictions. But there is, but organizations are looking at how they reduce greenhouse gas emissions because it's the right thing for their own sustainability for the next 100 years and also for their customers and their employees. So I would definitely say that if you look across the whole globe, it is companies primarily who have done the most action. Sometimes countries discuss things, but then they really lean on organizations. And as Ronnie said, organizations aren't really a thing. It's really the humans that lead them. So that is a good point. But an interesting, lack of action is really on the government side.
Oh, I want to be a good steward of our time together, and we have about 5 or 6 minutes. So if there's any additional questions, I would love to see those from the audience. But I wanted to ask, for those who are interested in careers in sustainability, or those who are interested in learning more about it, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And so, I didn't say when I graduated college with an electrical engineering degree, I wanted to go into sustainability. I don't think there was a degree at the time anyway, over 20 years ago. So I was an engineer for 18 years at Lockheed Martin, working on the fun products that we do, and became a chief engineer and again, sustainment and other areas, development. But when sustainability came along, I actually, applied actually, right, and got that position inside of our company to lead sustainability. And it's a combination of the technical, but that's not primarily technical, right? There's an aspect of investor relations. There's a big aspect of financial acumen and business acumen. And to do sustainability, you have to roll all those together. And as with most things, work, through people groups. So there's different aspects of sustainability. And when people come and ask me about, I want to come work in sustainability, I can tell you there aren't huge groups, even in big companies, whose job title is sustainability. It's possible to go do that. If that's your goal, you could probably have to wrap a few things together to be in that space. But maybe more importantly is, how do you bring it into what you're doing? And I think it's kind of like with business, right? If you're an engineer and you design things, that's one thing. But if you have a business perspective on it, and so that it's going to be profitable, and you're going to build it in a way that it makes sense, from a business, that's a whole different level of engineering. Well, the same thing with sustainability. Now add on whatever you're doing, and you could be in the accounting department, you could be an engineer, you could be in production on the flight line or wherever. If you innovate how you do what your actual task is sustainably, that's actually more important to me, leading the sustainability of the company, than for you to come and be one of the few people at corporate, right, that works at a high level on sustainability. I think once it's brought into individuals and you bring it as part of your job, kind of like people say, sales or BD, right, is everyone's job. Think of it that way, as another aspect of your role. Then I think you'll get in the mindset of it and get some experience. Now, there are a lot of jobs out there. So it's one of those areas like cybersecurity where there's way too many jobs and not enough people who want to do it. And so it is a great, it's a great function to get into, whether it's a small company or a consulting company or a large company. But you do just have to realize it's not one thing. I mentioned it's environmental and social and governance. So there are lawyers doing sustainability. There are technical people. There are every type of accountants. Again, it's becoming more and more of a disclosures thing with financials. So you also kind of have to dive into it and say, which aspect of it gets me excited? If you're an engineer, then maybe some of the other parts of sustainability aren't as exciting, right? And you want to find your niche in it, which was what I was able to do. And I'll just mention that I've actually moved on to now lead internal audit and risk management for Lockheed Martin. And you can imagine I now do sustainability assurance. So there's a sustainability group, and I'm actually still using some aspects of that to say, well, before we release, disclosures around sustainability to the world, are we making sure the data, almost like accounting, but for all the aspects of sustainability. So you can kind of apply it to whatever role you have, and that should still give you that impact.
It's interesting that you're positioning that as such a common layer across the entire organization. But it's difficult to say where one gets the training or the lensing, et cetera. Ronnie mentioned, your soul, which I like that reference. We have about 2 minutes left. I will give you kind of the closing remark, Ronnie, on how does somebody grow into this as a concept or role? How do you do it? Because your lensing is a little different, and I'm super curious.
You're talking about sustainability specifically?
How would somebody find a career in sustainability or train for it or broaden their horizons in that space? Because we've positioned it as such an organic construct, but it has to be learned and built in.
Well, first of all, I think we've done a pretty good job putting it on the table. I think the thing is on the table now. 20 years ago, nobody separated garbage. Okay, my kids, they don't know how to unseparate garbage. It's a thing. Okay, I think it's more on the leaders to put sustainability into everything. I don't think sustainability is a thing. There is sustainability, as Christopher said, in engineering, in lawyering, in insurance, everything. So the kids, the newcomers, should talk about it, but they should look for it as one of the functions. So if you design a product, there is the issue of circular economy, for example, and you should talk about it. Now, the product manager should put it as one of his targets, and it's putting the answer on its head. Okay, it's not about the students coming into new jobs screaming sustainability. It's about the managers starting to think about sustainability as a part of everything they do, regardless of what it is. So it's a layer, okay, and this layer should come from above, not from below. And I think the discussion is there, so we just have to push on forward with talking about it, and it will happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I believe that's our time together. I'm going to turn it back over to Dean Sharma for some remarks.
Okay, boy, what a fascinating discussion. My neck is kind of turning. We're going from, the combination, the connection between sustainability, AI, innovation. I picked up a lot of information from this discussion, and just the interconnection, and how I think both of you emphasize that sustainability just doesn't sit in a quiet little corner by itself. Thank you for the fascinating discussion. Thank you, Dr. Glassman. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Ronnie, for fantastic round of discussion. So applause to all of you for facilitating this wonderful conversation. Later in this wonderful series, we look forward to continuing this conversation on sustainability, business practices, through the lens of aviation industry in the context of airports, however. So please look forward to that. Until then, as we close out this edition of Vantage Point, we encourage you to join us next time and visit our ERAU YouTube channel. There you'll find our on-demand recordings of the past events, including this one today, and the entire sustainability series. Again, Christopher, Ronnie, and Aaron, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you everyone for attending it. Stay well, be well. Bye-bye.